Some places exist in the cracks between reality and nightmare. The Riverside Grocery wasn't supposed to be one of them. But on the night Marcus Chen decided to exact his revenge, he discovered that some aisles don't follow the laws of physics or morality. What began as a simple plan to expose corruption would become a descent into a supernatural hellscape where the sins of the past literally manifest as monsters. And the only way out is through the very darkness you've been running from. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Grocery buzzed with their usual electric hum as Marcus Chen pushed through the automatic doors. At 11:47 p.m., his hands trembled not from fear, from barely contained rage that had been simmering for 3 years, 2 months, and 17 days. That's exactly how long it had been since Richard Halloway, the store's owner, had destroyed his family. Marcus was 32 now, though the mirror showed someone much older. Dark circles hung beneath his eyes like bruises, and his once athletic frame had withered to something gaunt and hollow. The documentation folder tucked inside his jacket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 3 years of investigation, 3 years of following paper trails, bribing records clerks, and piecing together the truth that everyone else had been paid to ignore. Richard Halloway had known about the faulty wiring in the apartment building he owned, the building where Marcus's parents and younger sister lived, the building that had burned to the ground on a January night, taking 23 souls with it, including everyone Marcus had ever loved. The official report called it an accident. Marcus called it murder. Evening, the cashier aboard teenager named Jake muttered without looking up from his phone. Marcus nodded, pulling his baseball cap lower. He wasn't here to shop. He was here because he knew Halloway's routine. Every night at midnight, the wealthy businessman walked through his flagship store, checking inventory in his private office on the second floor, the office where he kept the original documents, the ones his lawyers had somehow kept out of court, the proof that would finally bring him to justice. The store was nearly empty at this hour. An elderly woman examined soup cans in aisle 3. A night shift worker grabbed energy drinks near the front. Perfect conditions for what Marcus needed to do. He moved with purpose toward the back of the store, past the dairy section and the freezers, toward the storage area and the stairs he'd scouted during a dozen previous visits. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. Tonight, he would photograph those documents, upload them to every news outlet in the state, and watch Richard Halloway's empire crumble. But as Marcus rounded the corner past 12, the final aisle before the storage area, he stopped. There was an aisle 13 that was impossible. Marcus had been here countless times. He'd memorized every inch of this store's layout. There were 12 aisles. Always 12. He'd counted them obsessively during his reconnaissance. The 13th. All stretched before him, bathed in a light that seemed somehow different from the rest of the store. Not brighter or dimmer. Just wrong. The fluorescent tubes above it flickered in a rhythm that suggested breathing, and the air around the aisle entrance shimmered, like heat waves rising from summer asphalt. Marcus felt his investigative instincts war with his survival instincts. This was weird. This was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Everything in his body screamed at him to turn around, to stick to his plan, to ignore this impossibility. But then he saw the sign hanging above the aisle's entrance. For those who seek a Rivian G. Words seemed to pulse with their own luminescence, written in a font that hurt to look at directly. As if the letters existed in more dimensions than his eyes could properly process. Marcus's mouth went dry. This had to be some kind of sick joke. Maybe Halloway knew he was coming. Maybe this was a trap. But beneath the main sign hung another, smaller placard. This one displayed a Polaroid photograph, yellowed and aged but unmistakable. It showed Marcus's family home. It's the modest house where he'd grown up before his parents had moved to the city for better opportunities. Standing in front of it were his mother, father, and little sister Lily. They were smiling, written beneath. The photo and handwriting he recognized as his mother's. Some prices are worth paying. Marcus's legs moved before his brain could catch up. He stepped into aisle 13. The temperature dropped immediately, not gradually, but all at once, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. Marcus's breath misted in the air. The sounds of the grocery store behind him, the hum of refrigerators, the distant beeping of the checkout scanner, Jake's thumbs tapping on his phone, all of it vanished into absolute silence. The shelves on either side of him were stocked with things, items that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. A can of soup would become a jar of something dark and writhing, then shift back the moment he focused on it. The price tags displayed numbers that made no mathematical sense. $1 to 7.99. $1 infinity. $1 your firstborn. Marcus walked forward because going back felt impossible now. The aisle stretched ahead of him, far longer than the physical dimensions of the building could allow. 50 feet, 100. The endpoint remained distant, receding with each step like a fever dream. "Hello, Marcus?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to originate inside his own skull. Marcus spun, but the aisle behind him had changed. Where the entrance had been, now there was only more aisle, stretching endlessly in both directions. "Who's there?" Marcus's voice came out strangled. "Who's there?" The voice echoed mockingly. "The better question is, who are you, Marcus Chen? Are you the grieving son? The obsessed investigator? The man who's let revenge consume 3 years of his life?" A figure materialized between the shelves, a head knot walking into view, but simply appearing as if it had always been there, and Marcus had only just noticed. It wore the uniform of a stock clerk, but its face was a smooth, featureless plane of skin, like a mannequin that hadn't been finished. "I want to leave," Marcus said, hating how his voice shook. "Oh, but you came here seeking something. Revenge. Justice? A way to make Richard Holloway pay." The faceless clerk's head tilted at an angle that would have broken a human neck. "This owl provides exactly what people seek. But first, you must understand what revenge truly costs." The clerk gestured to the shelf beside them. Marcus looked and immediately wished he hadn't. The items had stopped shifting. Now they were clearly visible, and each one made his stomach turn. Jars filled with what looked like tears. Bottles labeled with emotions. Hope, joy, love, each one appearing half empty or completely drained. There were boxes of years' literal portions of human lifespans packaged and priced. And there, on the middle shelf, a package wrapped in black paper with his name written across it in blood-red ink. "What is this?" Marcus whispered.
"Oh."
"Your revenge, Marcus. Everything you need to destroy Richard Holloway. Evidence that cannot be denied or dismissed. Documents that will stand up in any court. Witnesses who will suddenly remember what they saw, even a confession, in Holloway's own voice, that he knew about the wiring and chose profit over safety." Marcus's heart leapt. "You can give me that? I can. I will. But you must understand the transaction." The clerk's voice had taken on a strange, almost pitying quality. "Revenge is not free. It never has been. The price isn't money. Money means nothing here. The price is what revenge has already cost you and what it will continue to cost." The clerk gestured, and the aisle transformed around them. The shelves became windows into moments of Marcus's life. He saw himself at his sister's 9th birthday party, laughing as she blew out the candles. He saw his mother teaching him to cook in their kitchen, his father showing him how to change a tire, patient and encouraging. Then those images shattered, replaced by flames and screaming. 3 years, the clerk continued. 3 years you've spent chasing this man. 3 years you could have spent healing, building a new life. It's honoring your family's memory through living rather than through hatred. You've lost friends who tried to help you move on. You've abandoned the architecture career your parents were so proud of. You've become a ghost, Marcus, haunting your own life. He killed them. Marcus's shout echoed impossibly in the endless aisle. He knew, and he did nothing. 23 people died because of his greed. You're right, Richard Holloway is guilty, and he deserves to face justice. The clerk stepped closer. But ask yourself, if you proceed down this path, if you take what this aisle offers, will you survive your own revenge? Or will you become another thing that shouldn't exist, a man so consumed by the past that he has no future? Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. I don't care. They were everything to me. They were. Past tense. And they wouldn't want you to die with them, Marcus. Your sister Lily Shee wanted to be a teacher, yes? She wanted to help children learn and grow. Your revenge won't bring her back. But imagine, you could establish a scholarship in her name, could volunteer at schools, could become what she wanted to become. That's not enough, Marcus screamed. That's not justice. No, the clerk agreed. But it's life, and life is what they would want for you. The package with Marcus's name began to glow with a sickly green light. Marcus could feel its pull, like gravity itself was trying to drag him toward it. All the evidence he needed. All the proof that would destroy Holloway. It was right there. Behind him, he heard a sound, a familiar laugh. He turned and saw a shimmer in the air, like looking through water. Through it, he glimpsed the real world, the grocery store, the normal aisles. And there, walking toward the back stairs, with his characteristic arrogant stride, was Richard Holloway himself. 63 years old, perfectly tailored suit. A smile on his face like a man who'd never lost a night's sleep over the lives he'd destroyed. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. The rage returned, white-hot and overwhelming. Last chance, Marcus, the clerk said softly. Take the package, get your revenge, and lose what remains of yourself. Or walk away. Choose. The package pulsed. Waiting, Marcus Chen stood at the crossroads between vengeance and salvation. His hand hovering over the black-wrapped package that promised everything he'd wanted for 3 years. Through the shimmer in reality, he could see Richard Holloway disappearing up the back stairs, seconds away from being beyond reach. But then another image formed in the strange windows of the aisle. This one showed his mother, not from memory, but as if she were truly there, speaking directly to him. Her lips moved, and he heard her voice as clearly as if she stood beside him. Baby, you've carried us long enough. We're at peace. But you're still alive, and you're drowning. Please, Marcus, please let us go. The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus stumbled backward, his hand dropping away from the package. Mom. His voice broke on the word. She's not here, the faceless clerk said. But there was something almost gentle in its tone now. But what you heard was the truth your heart already knows. Your family loved you. They still do, in whatever way the dead can love. And love wants the living to live. Marcus looked down at his hands, the hands that had spent 3 years gathering evidence, making plans, feeding on hatred. They were shaking. When had they started shaking? When had he become this trembling, hollowed-out creature? I'm so tired, he whispered. I know. He still deserves to pay. He does, the clerk interrupted. And he will. But not by your hand, Marcus. Justice and revenge are not the same thing. One builds. The other destroys. You've spent 3 years choosing destruction. It's time to choose differently. The package began to fade, its sickly glow diminishing. As it disappeared, Marcus felt something break inside him, not his heart, but the iron cage he'd built around it. 3 years of rage cracked and fell away, and beneath it was something he'd forgotten existed. Grief. Pure, clean, devastating grief. He collapsed to his knees on the cold floor of the impossible aisle and wept. He wept for his mother's Sunday morning pancakes and the way she hummed while she cooked. He wept for his father's terrible jokes and his unshakable belief that Marcus could do anything. He wept for Lily, barely 16, who'd never get to teach her first class, or fall in love, or see all the beautiful things the world had to offer. He wept for himself, for the man he'd been before the fire, and the ghost he'd become after. The clerk stood silently, waiting. When Marcus finally looked up, his face soaked with tears, the creature's featureless face had somehow arranged itself into an expression that might have been compassion. What happens now? Marcus asked. Now you leave this aisle, you return to your life, and you make a choice every day to live instead of haunt. The clerk extended a hand, a normal hand now, human and warm. The path of revenge ends here, but the path of justice, that's still available to you if you want it. Marcus took the offered hand and stood. I don't understand. The evidence you've gathered over 3 years, it's real? It's substantial. You don't need supernatural intervention to bring Richard Holloway to justice. You need lawyers, journalists, and the persistence to see it through the proper channels. It will be slower than revenge, less satisfying to your rage, but it will be real. and it will honor your family's memory more than any act of vengeance ever could." The shimmer in reality expanded, showing multiple windows into the future. In one, Marcus saw himself in a courtroom, presenting his findings to a judge. In another, he stood at a school named after his sister, cutting a ribbon at its grand opening. In a third, he sat at a gravesite. This time he wasn't alone. There were friends with him, living friends, supporting him in his grief. "These futures are possible," the clerk said, "but only if you choose to leave this aisle and never return." Marcus looked back down the impossible corridor. It stretched on forever, filled with dark promises and terrible shortcuts. How many others had come here seeking what he'd sought? How many had taken the package and lost themselves? "I choose to leave," Marcus said firmly. The moment the words left his mouth, the aisle began to change. The shelves shrank, the impossible length compressed. The wrong light normalized into regular fluorescent illumination. Within seconds, Marcus found himself standing in the normal back section of Riverside Grocery. Right where aisle 12 ended and the storage area began, there was no aisle 13, had there ever been. Marcus heard footsteps on the stairs above Holloway, descending from his office, probably heading home. For a moment, the old rage flickered. How easy it would be to confront him, to grab him, to demand answers, to dash no. Marcus took a deep breath and turned away. He walked back through the store, past the normal aisles with their normal products, toward the exit. Jake, the cashier, didn't even look up as he passed. Outside, the night air was crisp and clean. Marcus pulled out his phone and began scrolling through his contacts. Most of them he hadn't called in years, friends who'd given up on him, colleagues who'd stopped trying to reach out. His finger hovered over one name, Jennifer Martinez, an investigative journalist he'd known in college. They'd been close once, before he'd pushed everyone away. He called, "Hello." Jennifer's voice was confused, cautious. Of course it was. He hadn't spoken to her in over 2 years. "Jen, it's Marcus." "Marcus Chen. I know I've been gone. I know I've been a terrible friend. But I have a story for you. A real story, and I need help telling it the right way." There was a long pause. "Marcus, are you okay? You sound different." "I am different. Or maybe I'm starting to be myself again. Can we meet tomorrow? I have 3 years of documented evidence that Richard Holloway knew about the faulty wiring in the Riverside apartments. I want to bring him to justice. Not revenge justice. The legal kind." Another pause, shorter this time. "I'm listening. Come to my office tomorrow at 9. And Marcus, I'm glad you called." The next 6 months were the hardest of Marcus's life, but in a different way than the previous 3 years. Instead of feeding his rage in isolation, he was forced to navigate the frustrating, complex, maddeningly slow machinery of actual justice. Jennifer's newspaper published the first story. The documents Marcus had gathered, emails from Holloway's company, inspection reports that had been buried. Testimony from whistleblowers who'd been paid off, all of it went public. But Holloway had expensive lawyers. The story got buried beneath other news. There were denials, deflections, counter-dash suits. Marcus wanted to scream. He wanted to give up. Some nights, lying in bed, he swore he could hear that faceless clerk's voice. "The package is still available. Just come back to the aisle." But he didn't go back. Instead, he called Jennifer. He called the victims' families and asked if they wanted to join a civil suit. He reached out to his old architecture firm and explained he was ready to return to work part-time. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in grief and trauma. Slowly, painfully, he began to rebuild. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday morning. A building inspector named Thomas Wright, who'd been young and scared when Holloway's people had pressured him to falsify the initial report, walked into Jennifer's office with the original, unaltered inspection documents. His conscience had finally overcome his fear. With that evidence, the criminal case became solid. The prosecutor, who'd previously declined to pursue charges, reopened the investigation. Holloway's lawyers scrambled. The foundation of their defense was crumbling. Marcus sat in court the day the indictment was read. 23 counts of negligent homicide, fraud, conspiracy. As he listened to the charges, he waited to feel the savage satisfaction he'd imagined for so long. It didn't come. Instead, he felt something quieter, something that might have been the first whisper of peace. This was justice. It was slow and imperfect, and would never bring his family back, but it was real. It mattered. When the verdict came down guilty, on all counts, Marcus was surrounded by people. Jennifer squeezed his hand. Other victims' families embraced him. His therapist sent a text of congratulation. He wasn't alone anymore. 1 year after that night in Riverside Grocery, Marcus stood in front of a new building. It wasn't large, just a small community center in the neighborhood where the Riverside Apartments had once stood. But it was beautiful, with wide windows and bright, welcoming spaces. Above the door, carved in warm wood, the Lily Chen Youth Center. Inside were classrooms for tutoring, art studios, a computer lab, and a library. Everything was free to the community's children. Everything was built with the settlement money from the civil suit against Holloway's company money. Marcus had insisted go toward something positive, something that would help rather than harm. His mother would have approved. His father would have helped with the construction. And Lily would have loved to teach here. It's perfect, Jennifer said beside him. She'd become more than a colleague over the past year. Not quite a girlfriend yet, but something that felt like it was growing in that direction. Marcus was okay with slow growth now. He'd learned its value. It's not enough, Marcus said quietly. It doesn't bring them back. Jennifer agreed. But it honors them, and it helps. That counts for something. Marcus nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest that still came when he thought of his family. But alongside the grief now was something else. Gratitude for the years he'd had with them. And determination to make sure their legacy was love and growth, not hate and destruction. He never told Jennifer about the 13th aisle. Some experiences defied explanation. But sometimes, late at night, he wondered about that faceless clerk. Was it some guardian of cosmic balance? A test from the universe. His own conscience made manifest. It didn't matter. What mattered was the choice he'd made. That evening, Marcus found himself back at Riverside Grocery for the first time since that night. He wasn't sure why he'd come. Nostalgia, curiosity, or maybe just the need to prove to himself that he'd truly moved on. The store looked exactly the same. 12 aisles. Normal fluorescent lighting. Jake, the cashier, was still there, now scrolling through a different phone. Marcus walked to the back, past dairy and freezers, to where aisle 12 ended. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the blank wall where aisle 13 had been or had seemed to be. Looking for something? Marcus turned to find an elderly stock clerk watching him with kind eyes. No, he said, and realized it was true. I found what I was looking for already. The clerk smiled. Good for you, son. Most folks spend their whole lives searching in the wrong places. As Marcus walked back through the store, he passed the soup aisle and saw the elderly woman who'd been there that night a year ago. She looked up and met his eyes, and for just a moment, Marcus thought he saw something ancient and knowing in her gaze. Some prices are worth paying, she said softly. But the highest price is always the life you don't live. He left Riverside Grocery and drove to the cemetery, where his family rested. He placed fresh flowers on their graves and sat for a while, telling them about the youth center, about Jennifer, about the life he was slowly, carefully rebuilding. I miss you every day, he said to the 3 headstones. But I'm living now. Really living. Not just existing in the space between grief and revenge. I think you'd be proud of that. The evening breeze rustled the leaves overhead, and Marcus chose to interpret it as agreement as he drove home. He passed Riverside Grocery one final time. In the window, just for an instant, he thought he saw a sign that hadn't been there before. Thank you for choosing wisely. But when he blinked, it was gone. Marcus smiled and kept driving. Toward a future that was uncertain but his own. Toward a life that honored the dead by embracing the gift of still being alive. Toward a tomorrow that would never include his family, but would be built on the foundation of their love. The aisle that shouldn't exist had offered him everything he thought he wanted. He'd walked away with something better, himself. And that Marcus Chen finally understood. was the only revenge that truly mattered, refusing to let tragedy turn him into something monstrous, and instead becoming someone his family would recognize and embrace. The night sky above him was full of stars, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus looked up and felt something other than pain. He felt hope.